for having me.
Hi, and welcome to Global Beehive Talk. Today with Andi Kravljaca, the digital strategist of Nacka Kommun. Welcome so much to Global Beehive Talk.
Well, thank you very much, Hans. Thank you for having me.
It's a privilege of having you here, and you are one of the front runner, I think, when it comes to the digital development of the public sector, and especially around Nacka Kommun, or Kommun here in Sweden. And tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your background.
Well, all right. My name is Andi Kravljaca. As I said, I work for the city of Nacka in Sweden, the municipality. I've been working in local municipalities for the last 15 years. And I think it's the greatest job in the world. And I want to just tell a little bit of a story. The first time I understood what it meant to work for a city was when I had a meeting about some, process automation method in a conference room. And as I stepped outside, the next people going into that same conference room were a wedding party. And that's the really cool thing about what we do in cities. And so being, being at the forefront of developing that, how to run a city, how to be a city is what I love to do. So that's me. I'm a teacher in mathematics and sciences, and got into the IT and management track a little bit over 10 years ago. So that's me.
Oh, wonderful to hear, especially the teaching part. Is it that common that you move from sort of teaching to more of a digital strategies when you sort of see the purpose and opportunities with digital?
Well, I'll tell you what, I do notice that a lot of the people who are in higher management in cities do tend to have a teaching background. Now, that's of course statistics, because the largest number of employees for a city or municipality tend to be in the school sector. But also, I think because it gives you a certain talent for observation and for presentation, for preparation that kind of serves you in good stead otherwise in your career. So I do tend to encounter a lot of teachers who are in non-teaching positions, if that makes any sense.
Yes, I think so. I think so. What I can tell a little bit from especially the Swedish public system is that it's been going through quite a lot of change with digitalization. That the citizens having a little bit different expectations of what to expect from the municipalities and so on. What do you see are the main challenges and opportunities for digitalization in your area?
Okay, so the fundamentally interesting thing about a city is that it kind of brings to mind that old story about the bumblebee that's too big to fly, but it doesn't know that it's too big to fly. The city is a conglomerate of organizations who each have their own core business and each have their own business model. And to add to this, the things that a city is obligated to do varies from country to country. And also cities who are competing for citizens take it upon themselves to go above and beyond their stated obligations. So a city is everything from pet cemeteries to strategic city planning, from daycare to palliative care in the later stages of life. It is in Star Trek, there's a line, infinite diversity and infinite combinations. And this also makes a city into a very problematic and challenging kind of leadership and data situation. The value chains, the citizen journey, the milestone events in the lives of our customers, our citizens, are far too large for any one part of that organization to grasp. Too many contact points, too many connections, too many translations, too many handovers for the whole picture to be clear for any one person involved in the chain. So it's very difficult to have an all-encompassing strategic document, because often different parts of the city's organization need to move in opposite directions. Some departments need increased centralization, some require increased decentralization. And it's very hard to write a strategic document for the whole organization. And when we try, they end up being on such a high level that they contain really general kind of statements about increasing the quality of life for citizens. And that's something that it just isn't enough to guide prioritization and development. So we do what any other business would do, is we section it in separate entities. So by trying to understand this big issue, this big customer journey, we break it down into smaller issues. And from the very beginning, we build myopia into the understanding of our own business. So the problem with digitalization, to come back to what you're actually asking me, is that when we run digitalization projects of a certain size in these organizations, very often along the way we discover hangups, unforeseen contact points, unforeseen translation points, unforeseen connections. as we go along in a project. And that's a direct result of the compartmentalization which we had to do to be able to run the city, to be able to see that problem. So that means the project can't fulfill its goals and requires extensive rescoping, or it swells beyond the capability of its own governance. So kind of we seem to have an ability to solve problems of a certain size very well, but we can't seem to grow that size. Beyond that size, we keep running into that same thing, that big picture that's too big for any one project to take on. So there's a number there in Sweden, the average length of a digitalization project timeline is 31 months. And in those 31 months, over 2/3 of digitalization projects fail to meet one or more of their stated goals. And that just isn't good enough.
Mm. But what I see when talking to businesses is that they are struggling so much about managing unpredictability in the market and so on. But I can sense that you're also struggling with unpredictability internally in the organization as well.
Absolutely.
With new kind of scenarios and processes that you maybe have not foreseen, or new kind of circumstances, prerequisites. How do you manage that?
Well, I mean, the reason we're so bad at it isn't that we're unwilling to share data or that we have concerns about like competition or data security, because it's internal. It's that we can't pool our data internally. Small scale entities have actual legal ownership of small quantities of data. And together, those quantities of data form this massive data set over every aspect of our citizens' lives. People think, a city knows everything about you. But no individual entity has a critical mass of data all on its own. So the data model seems to be not so much of like a business concern, but more of a spy ring, We see, so the problem is you see a lot of small scale AI machine learning projects, which are kind of implemented with great fanfare, and inevitably they fail to scale because the underlying issue hasn't been addressed. And I think that's not really a challenge that's technical or a challenge of like a lack of innovation culture. It's more about the fundamental issue of designing processes for an entire city. So we have to design strategies, policies, customer journey maps, and organizational processes in a way that prevents us from hitting that wall. By questioning, these organizational entity boundaries and saying, is that a necessary fact of life? If a conglomerate is too big to be a concern, well, maybe the right thing to do sometimes is to let it be what it is, but sometimes it's to rethink along which lines we divide ourselves. So maybe we shouldn't divide ourselves along the lines that are easiest to govern internally in terms of paycheck and hierarchical structure, but maybe horizontally according to a particular citizen journey or something like that.
But are you trying to work on simplification of things, in that being a little bit contradictory to sort of what customers are expecting, more individualistic solutions? How do you balance that?
Well, you're thinking individualistic solutions. Yes, I mean, of course, in this day and age, everybody wants a solution that is customized to their own needs. But I think that to our counterpart, to our client, to our customer, to the citizen, or the visitor, or a small business owner, or a person in need of financial aid, or whatever, we are one organization. And our citizens in general tend to stay with us. And to them, we are a single entity. They don't think of us as a library of separate organizations. And that's perfectly in order, because the reason we run this place as separate organizations is internal. It's because of the overload we experience when we try to govern the city as a single business entity. And that very practical aspect lies the core of why we have to work to bring the citizen journey together, rather than the hierarchical structure together. So part of doing that perhaps is organizing your organization in processes rather than hierarchical structures that are paycheck based and kind of like business responsibility based. There's PM3 and the whole object view of like what are the deliveries that we do, what are the decisions that we make, and basically forming organizations around those decisions and those products, rather than structuring according to who's boss, so to speak.
No, but what you're describing is a very, very difficult and very complex digital transformation, so to say. And I think it would is probably far more complex than any company that has sort of one vision or one objective to fulfill. But where do you start in this complex area? And I mean, how do you build momentum for change? How do you get people on board on this?
Right. Well, I think you start with the very specific, concrete set of needs which our citizens have,
Yeah.
and which are constantly changing. So part of bringing a cultural shift into the city is actually, looking outward and trying to keep track of which needs are arising in our citizens before they've even arisen, so that we're designing methods to fulfill these needs before the needs have actually manifested themselves. So depending on those needs, we can design services which meet them, or we can help our citizens stay proactive in their own journey so that the need doesn't even, surface. But the thing is that the organization kind of like based on a citizen journey, the horizontal organization, and the organization based on internal staffing and budgetary frameworks, those are often at odds with each other. So one place to start is with the needs of the citizen, but another one is with the actual budgetary system that's in place. It is nearly impossible for a manager today or director in the current system to justify an expenditure which doesn't generate revenue within their own sphere. So if I'm betting money, but your part of the organization is getting a plus from that, that isn't necessarily visible in my results. So each sphere is evaluated separately economically. And the model very rarely contains provisions for spending money in one place only to see positive change in another. So this creates an incentive toward that same myopia, as each part of the organization looks for ways to solve their own issues within the boundaries of their organization and their area of responsibility. But the world isn't that simple. Very often, the best solutions to a given set of problems can be found in parts all over the organization. And the solutions can't be formed without having all of those components. And in the current model, which a lot of cities and municipalities have, we have very little support for that level of lateral thinking. So I think that it's a two-pronged attack. Partially, you have to attack, the needs of the citizens as they arise, and partially, we need to address the elephant in the room, which is our own financial, monetary compensation and evaluation model.
But isn't that very difficult to change? Because I guess that is sort of dictated by the sort of government directives of what a municipality should do and how it should be governed. Or is that something you have the freedom to do yourself?
Well, the government the government gives cities a certain amount of things that they have to do. So for instance, you have to provide social care, you have to provide education, and so on. It also mandates that you have to divide your organization into certain entities, but it only actually calls quite a few of those. It calls like for an organization with which you can manage elections, and it calls for an organization with which you can manage social welfare. Beyond that, you are actually free to organize the city as you wish. And I think that the underlying challenge of this is not what the law tells us we have to do, but what our nature as humans tells us, that when we have a very complex organization, the first thing we do is we section it off because it makes it easier to understand. And I think the direction in which we section it off to start with, that's what needs to change. I don't think it'll be possible for a person to understand this whole business. That's not what I'm suggesting. But I'm just suggesting, like, before we cut the pineapple, let's talk about which direction we should cut it.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable. I mean, I think this is part of the simplification and actually cutting the pineapple in the best possible way, and not the same way it's been cut the last 50 years.
Exactly.
And another thing that's been happening during the last year is the COVID-19, obviously. And I guess you from the municipality has been affected quite a lot by this. Can you tell me a little bit about how you have been affected and how you seem to have managed this? What happened in the organization when this started?
Well, the first thing to understand is that when extraordinary situations happen, people put in extraordinary work. So it is normal in the first few months of a crisis for everyone to band together, forget about their differences, and work towards a common good together. I think as time goes along,
Mm.
there can be an expectation that that extraordinary work effort should just become permanent without talking. But that's not really realistic, I think, just from a work environment perspective, because I think people are pulling all-nighters and people are doing more, they're going far above and beyond the call of duty, and you can't do that forever. But what you can do is you can look at situations like all over Sweden, all over the world,
Mm.
within 3 or 4 days of the lockdown going into effect, there were these plexiglass windows in every reception, every passport control, every bank office, every city, every wherever you went. There were these plexiglass walls where you would talk to the teller through plexiglass. Where did they all come from? The manufacture, the distribution, the procurement, the installation, and the implementation, including workplace training around that all happened in a matter of days, which is less time than it usually takes to just publish, the notes from a meeting from like a governance group or something like that. So what can we do with regards to just like pressing the record button in our own organization and going like, what did we do to make all of these decisions faster and to make them more effectively? And maybe it doesn't have to happen in 4 days, but it certainly shouldn't take 31 months. And if it takes 31 months, it shouldn't fail to meet, its goals 70% of the time. So what can we do to kind of like record what we did now and then play it back when it's time to rebuild our permanent organization after this?
Okay, can you give some sort of example of what you did actually to speed things up? Did you change sort of the governance structure, or did you change processes, or what was it that you did concretely to speed things up?
Well, Nacka is in a very particular position. We are a municipality which doesn't have a very strong kind of centralized structure. Our management tiers, even including the lower ones, have always had a great amount of agency and a great amount of like ability to make their own decisions, to make their own procurements and so on. And for us, it's more been, about going in the other, as I was talking about before, some parts of municipality need more decentralization, some need more centralization. For us, it's kind of like been going in the other direction, that we've been able to make decisions so quickly that we kind of have to do the other thing. So we were already very primed to handle Corona very well in our organization, because we work in an organization that makes decisions very quickly. I think what we need to do is to find a way to do that and still be able to scale up the solution. So we've been doing quite the opposite. We've been putting centralized, processes in place where we can actually take some of the burden away from a lower tier manager who wants to make a procurement or something. Now they can have a process to lean back into and say, okay, now I can just follow this process and I know what's going to come out the other end. That makes it easier, and the threshold is lower for even lower management tiers to be able to say, I have a need, I want to buy something or figure something out to solve it. And that isn't for everybody. This is not a one-stop shop solution for everybody, but for Nacka, I think it worked really well.
It's interesting to hear that, how you actually managed this crisis coming, and that you were, as you had a little bit different kind of approach, that you could manage it more quickly and better than probably others. Another thing I want to talk to you about is actually that I hear many municipalities are working with process automation as being very popular tool or method for automating, for example, call centers and other processes in the municipality. What is your view on this? Why does it work for some people and not for others? What were your sort of takeaways from this?
Okay, so robotic process automation is a bit of a buzzword, and it's something where cities are trying to very much outdo themselves these days. We have 8 processes, we have 9 processes, we have 12. And it kind of boils down to the number of processes you have. For me, RPA, as much as I really think that the technology has a place in the ecosystem, I think RPA fundamentally is a Band-Aid. It basically patches up functionality which isn't there in the system to begin with. So for instance, if you want economic flows that'll give you your invoicing information automatically, well, you don't have that in your system, so you put an RPA on it that can make sure to get that invoicing information synchronized with your financial system. That's great, but that's not the ultimate solution. The ultimate solution is to build all this functionality into the system so that you don't need RPA. So the ultimate goal of RPA is to make itself redundant. And so from that perspective, I don't think that it is wise for municipalities to start their RPA journey with taking a look at really big processes. Now we're going to take a look at the entire social welfare assistance process from start to finish, and we're going to automate that. I would rather say, think of RPA as a component in your integration solution, and use RPA for the same process component of many different processes. Like for instance, if you have some kind of a system where people send you information online through forms, and you need to put that inside your normal system which you work with. Well, use RPA to just synchronize that, because that is a typically kind of like dumb task that RPAs are really good at, and where traditional integration can be kind of costly and take a while to develop. You can use RPA to prove your business case. If you say you want to pay 150,000 crowns for an integration, well, do the integration with RPA, build that in a few weeks, test drive that, and see if it gives you, the fundamental increase in efficiency which you're looking for. And then if you're happy with that, then you can look at building that integration. So use it as a tool rather than automating your entire processes through RPA, I think is the key, because a lot of municipalities get stuck. They start with the big one, which is the one Trelleborg went with, which was the social welfare one. And then you figure out, as I said before, that entire journey is too big for any part of the organization to grasp. You don't grasp the entire process. The process isn't completely digital. There's some kind of paper transaction somewhere in there. It's not completely predictable. And you start developing that process and you're stuck for 9 months, doing workshops. Rather than just saying, okay, let's take a look at this one step from system A to system B, and then just do it for all of your processes.
Excellent, because I believe somehow that many municipalities, and also companies for that matter, are more or less competing how many processes they can automate, meaning it becomes very fragmented and difficult to scale, rather than to build the foundation first and then actually build slowly up to something that is worth scaling and working in that sense. So I think I think that is very much aligned to what you're saying as well. If you would have the opportunity to give some advice to other digital strategists, either in companies or in municipalities, what would you say to them?
Well, I think one of the most optimistic outcomes of anyone listening to me in this effort would be that organizations, cities, municipalities, private companies, when they learn how to deal with complex and interconnected reality on their own, also learn how to deal with even larger value chains and customer journeys. I wouldn't want the citizen to just view the local municipality as one entity. I'd want that entity to encompass, the entire public sector. We all serve the same people in the same situations with the same needs. And it is fundamentally unfair of us to expect those people to keep track of the workarounds which we need in order for our internal models to make sense. So try to build something that doesn't just connect your internal customer journey. Try to build something which is part of an even larger value chain. Try to build something together with private enterprise, with neighboring municipalities, with government agencies that border onto your processes, and see the even bigger value chain and what value you're adding in that chain.
Yeah, that's really interesting to see the whole picture rather than to sort of sub-optimize only one area. How do you go about doing that? Is that by collaborating with other municipalities or other public organizations, or how do you do that?
Yes, you do that in two ways. You do it from below by showing up Basically, when there are projects and when there are workshops and where there are a thousand different interaction forums where people like me are very active and are very happy to talk to you about what you could be doing to help us, and very curious about what we could be doing to help you. And also, it's from above by affecting decision makers and policy makers at a high level to basically not build that myopia. So it's really the same solution as you do on the municipality scale. You just scale that up and say you do it from below and from above at the same time, which is exactly the same solution I told you about 10 minutes ago, just on a bigger level.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Andy. We're running out of time, and it's been a pleasure talking to you. And I so admire your view about municipality and the change it's ongoing in these areas. And what I learned today is very much the complexity of these municipalities from all different perspectives and areas, and the difficulties to find one way of working, but rather having many ways of working that needs to satisfy many stakeholders.
Well, it was my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much, and I hope to hear more from you in the future. Thank you so much.